Welcome to Game On Business Talk Radio with your host, Dr. D. Anthony Miles. Our program is not afraid to discuss controversial business ideas and topics. Get ready for an unfiltered discussion of problems and solutions that today's businesses, large or small, face daily. Now, here's Dr. D. Anthony Miles.
Hi, this is Game On Business Talk with D. Anthony Miles. We have an awesome show for you today. Get some coffee and have a seat. You're going to need a Bible and a seatbelt. This is Game On Business Talk on nationally syndicated radio. We have a wonderful show for you today. The topic for our show today is mental wellness and mental wellness for the healthy living and life. And our guest today is Jessica Lattin, principal and founder of JL Counseling LLC. Jessica has a counseling practice in Shreveport, Louisiana. She provides counseling services that specialize in domestic violence, pregnancy, prenatal, and postpartum care. She's also a licensed professional counselor, has a graduate certificate in dynamics of domestic and family violence. She holds an MA and a BA degree from Louisiana Tech University in counseling and guidance and psychology. I want to welcome our wonderful guest today for our show, Jessica Lattin. Jessica, how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. I've been waiting for this all week. Goodness.
Me too. I'm excited.
Well, we want to jump right into it. I want you to tell our audience, basically, what is maternal mental health and why is it important? Because I think one of the things you're going to talk about mental wellness for the healthy living in life. And one of the things is we definitely have some things that people need to be aware of, like maternal mental health and perinatal, if I'm saying it right, perinatal mental health illness. We definitely need for you to give us some insight on that and what that is. And can you tell us first what's maternal mental health and why is that important?
Okay, yes. So maternal mental health is basically like the overall well-being of a mother or a woman's psychological and emotional health. So particularly with the perinatal mental health, I focus on women who are either preparing to have a child or throughout the pregnancy and even after they've had children. So we cover everything from their physical health to their mental health because it all coincides with one another. So it's just the overall package.
Wonderful. Now, is that for women or is that for the families, the maternal mental health? Is that just for women or is that for the whole family?
It's primarily for the women, but I do work with a lot of couples because it affects everybody that's associated. So definitely your spouse or your partner, and also the other children, if you have other children involved as well. So I work with couples and families as well when it comes to maternal mental health because support is definitely needed for women who are dealing with perinatal mental illness.
Oh, wonderful. What are some characteristics that say a person, or I guess particularly a woman, needs some help with maternal mental health? And is there some symptoms of that? Is there some kind of things that we should be looking for that they need help?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the key signs is lack of overall self-care, just not really taking care of themselves as far as eating, sleeping. They might have several mood changes throughout the day, and it might be out of normal for that person. Also, just kind of failure to be attentive and bond with their newborn baby with their children as well. So those are one of the main signs and symptoms of a perinatal mental illness. Also, extreme anxiety, excessive worry about harming their baby or somebody else harming their baby. So there's tons of symptoms, but those are just a few.
How common is that for women to experience maternal mental health like that? How common is that?
Oh, it's very common. So 1 in 5 women experience postpartum depression or some sort of perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. And actually 1 in 10 men will experience a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder as well. So it's very common. Yes.
Goodness. Now, so what does perinatal focus on? Is it someone other than the woman? Is that what it means? It kind of seems like that.
So perinatal is basically from before, during, and after birth. So that
Okay.
if you might hear it with medical providers, if they talk about perinatal, they're talking about those three time periods of the pregnancy. So before, during, and after.
Okay. Wonderful. And I'm afraid to ask, but what are some symptoms for perinatal mental illness that someone needs help with that? What are some symptoms of that?
Okay, so basically there are a few specific perinatal mental illnesses out there. So, of course, we've heard of the common one, postpartum depression. So that
Right.
includes just being very sad, isolating yourself, not getting enough sleep, crying a lot, that type of thing. But then there's also perinatal anxiety, which is what I mentioned before briefly about just having extreme anxiety about the well-being and the health of your baby, or worrying if somebody is going to harm your baby. There's also perinatal OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, where they may have obsessive rituals and intrusive thoughts of harming their child. And then there's also perinatal psychosis, where we see women that are hallucinating and delusional, and they wind up having to be hospitalized. You may have seen extreme cases in instances on the news where women have actually committed infanticide, or they've harmed their children, or had like a double like homicide, suicide type thing. So you see those are very extreme cases. It only happens in 1 in 1,000 women. So it's very rare, but when it does happen, it's very serious.
Yeah, Jessica, you was making me think of that case with that lady. I forgot her name. It was some years ago. It's been probably over 10 years now. That she killed
Yeah.
her newborn baby. I think she had a baby, and did she kill all her children, or I think it was the newborn.
Yes, yes. There was one very popular in I want to say it was the 90s, because I remember it from when I was a
Mhm.
kid. It was a woman who
Yeah,
drowned her children. Yeah,
exactly.
and yeah. So that is essentially perinatal psychosis.
What is you say that's rare when it gets to an extreme like that? That's not too
Yes.
common.
No, that's not common. Most women that do have any intrusive thoughts of hurting or harming their baby, and I just want for the listeners out there to know that if you do have those types of thoughts, that is very common, and you don't have to feel embarrassed about it. The difference between psychosis and just anxiety or OCD is that you have awareness and you know, oh, that thought isn't right. I need to get some help, and you'll seek some help. But someone who is psychotic, they have no understanding that what's going on in their mind is not right or doesn't make sense.
Does the mental illness of maternal, does it affect women differently, and it may some women will go to an extreme like that? Because a woman usually doesn't kill her own kids. That's just not real common, is it?
No, it's not. And a lot of it comes down to, of course, hormone imbalance right after your baby is born. Our body is going through a lot of changes throughout the entire pregnancy. So a lot of it is related to a hormone imbalance, but also one risk factor is if you've previously had a diagnosed mental illness of depression or bipolar disorder. So that's a high risk for that. But other than that, most women, if they do have postpartum depression, they don't always think about harming themselves or harming their children. It may just be not necessarily bonding properly with their child.
Goodness. Wow. And now, flip this on the other side. You said it also affects the spouse as well. How does that
Yes.
affect the spouse? Is that because it's a new dynamic with a new baby and they're having to make adjustments? What's your expert opinion?
Yeah, definitely. So if you think about when you had your own children, how nervous you were as a new father, and oh my God, how am I going to take care of these children financially and even emotionally? You know, back in the day, fathers were more so viewed as disciplinarians instead of nurturers. And so I think we are seeing a shift in our fathers now being more nurturers and more hands-on. And that can just be very intimidating, but you're more likely to have a perinatal mood disorder as a husband or spouse or significant other if the pregnant woman or the postpartum woman has a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder.
Now, are there some symptoms that the women need to pay attention to their spouses? Is there some symptoms for them as well, or is it just usually for the women?
I would say it would be about the same. So difficulty sleeping, not eating, drastic mood changes, angry outbursts, irritability, things of that nature.
Oh, goodness. Do you think this happens across cultural lines or racial lines or ethnic lines? Does it affect everybody the same? What's your expert opinion on that, Jessica?
Oh, yes, it does affect everybody. There is no culture or no race or ethnicity that is exempt from it. However, with African Americans, we are more likely to have a undiagnosed perinatal mental illness because there's such a stigma with mental health in general in our community. And so we kind of think, oh, well, this is normal and I'll just get through it. And we never really take the time out to really look deeper into things. So unfortunately, African Americans are at a higher rate of having postpartum depression than their white counterparts.
You just made me think of this. I got to ask you this, Jessica. I know you've seen this movie. Was it For Color Girls Only? And that pivotal scene where that man put his kids out there because he was having trouble. I think the woman didn't want to marry him. She didn't think they were ready to get married or something.
Yeah.
Was the same case of that where the environment is just toxic for the kids, where the man is acting like that? Have you seen that in your practice? You know, counseling people. Have you seen anything like that?
I used to work in foster care as well, so I've seen a lot of instances of domestic violence. And in that particular movie, he was a veteran that dealt with PTSD. So he was having a lot of PTSD episodes. So he really needed a lot of mental health support, but I guess he just wasn't getting what he needed. But I see that a lot. But mental illness, I think we do look at the movies and it just really exaggerates and makes it seem like everybody who has a mental illness is going to go out here and just do something off the wall, and that's very, very rare. A lot of times they just need the support and the help, and they're not wanting to hurt anybody.
Because I definitely see your point on that, because it takes a lot for somebody to want to take their own kid's life. I mean, do some people just get pushed over the edge? What's been your experience of what you've seen?
I think a lot of times it just, like you said, you can't take it anymore. You just don't have any hope, really, and that's one of the things I try to give people in my counseling practice is give them hope and help them to realize, like, this situation you're in is only temporary, and if you do the work, then we can get you to a level of peace and helping you to hopefully move forward in your life.
Oh, that's wonderful. I was also thinking about a case that happened here in San Antonio where a lady, she was just having trouble in her life. I think she wasn't able to keep a job because she had a disabled daughter that was in one of the, the chairs. A young lady couldn't walk. And she killed all her kids and killed herself.
Wow.
Could you see any signs that it may lead to that from someone that may need help?
So some signs of suicidality are withdrawal or isolation. Sometimes you'll see people giving away things, like prized possessions. They'll just
Mm-hmm.
give them away as gifts to people.
Mm-hmm.
But typically, sometimes there is no warning, and sometimes people just do it. We do see a lot of cries for help sometimes on social media. You may see someone say something. So I just always encourage people, if you do see something that's a little off or a little strange, or somebody seems to be very obsessed with death or saying they can't take it anymore, or they just don't know what they're going to do, definitely give them the number to the suicide hotline, because that could be the difference between life or death. You could literally save their life, because sometimes they're just looking for somebody to care.
I think that the mother, you provide an excellent analysis. Excuse me. I think the mother just went beyond a point of she just couldn't take it anymore. And she figured she'd rather take their lives and not have them not live in poverty. And it was a really sad case. She had 3 children, and she killed all of them.
A lot of times people feel like they are a burden, you know, and if you can't take care of your children, you feel like, oh, they might be better off without me, but that's really not the case. There's so many resources out there for single parents. There's just so many things out there, so never think that it's the only way out is to end your life or to end your children's life. There's always another option.
How do you make somebody see that, Jessica? How do you make them, because when people get into a mood, and that's the only only way to address some problems, and it's really not. You know, how you deal with a problem, it may be your perspective about it. All problems have a solution. But how do you talk to somebody, get them out of that mindset? What do you say to them?
So one particular thing that I say don't make a permanent decision based on temporary emotions, because I tell them, I'm like, when you woke up this morning, you probably felt one way. In the afternoon, you probably felt another way. This evening, you're probably going to feel another way. Our emotions are constantly changing, so you never want to make a permanent decision based on temporary emotions. Another thing that I also tell my clients is I have them reflect on a time in their past where they thought, oh, my God, it's the end of the world, I'm not going to make it. And then they'll be able to see, oh, well, I did overcome that in my life, and I thought that was the worst time of my life. So usually when you can look back at a time where you did overcome something that you thought was so horrible, it gives you the motivation to push past this time period presently.
Interesting. We're going to take our first break, Jessica. We'll be right back. This is Game On Business Talk. We'll be right back. Hi, we're back. This is Game On Business Talk with Anthony Miles. We have our show today on mental wellness for healthy living and life. And we have our wonderful guest, Jessica Ladden, principal and founder of JL Counseling, LLC. And we had a riveting first segment where we talked about some of the maternal issues, maternal illnesses that people have, especially after having a new child in the home. And definitely, we were piggybacking on our last segment, Jessica. That was a very, very sad case that we were talking about, and you just would think a mother would do something like that. So, but goodness, domestic violence and mental wellness. What I gotta ask you, maybe I want to be clear on this. What's a clear definition, or your definition of domestic violence?
Okay, so domestic violence is basically like violent or aggressive patterns of behavior in the home. It's particularly towards a partner or a spouse, and sometimes children are involved as well. So it's basically just a violent or aggressive pattern, but that's the key word, pattern. So it has to occur multiple times.
Now, in domestic violence, when you counsel people, is it a aggressor and a passive person, or can it be both?
Usually there is always an aggressor. There's always someone in the relationship that has power and control over the other person. And that's really what domestic violence is all about. It's about power and control.
And I, I think now we're starting to see this. I'm not going to say it's more of a balance because there's always going to be more males committing domestic violence. But do you see a balance between the two? And what's been your experience?
There definitely are women who commit domestic violence or abusive acts, definitely. And we always try to precursor that when we have different trainings and talks about domestic violence because, of course, we want the men to know that we're here for you guys, too, if you're in an abusive relationship. But statistics do show that men are usually the perpetrators in domestic violence cases.
Do you have some women that come see you that probably didn't know they were in a domestic violence situation or something that they just tolerated, but they didn't see it that way? Have you had clients like that, Jessica?
Oh, yes, often. And it's usually because it wasn't necessarily physical. It was more so emotional or verbal abuse, and maybe that's something that they were exposed to in their childhood, and so they don't know what is considered to be a healthy relationship. They haven't had an example of that. So unfortunately, they get caught up in a relationship in their adulthood that reflects what they saw as a child.
Well, interesting. And you know the statistics on this better than me. Has there been an increase in domestic violence in the United States?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Wow.
And particularly in the state that I'm in, Louisiana, we are actually number 2 in the country for domestic homicides. We're only next to Alaska is number 1. So the United States has a major problem in domestic violence and domestic homicides.
Why is it so high in Alaska? Is it? I've got to hear this.
I think it's because, and this is what I've heard, is that they're more isolated up there. It's more rural areas in Alaska, and so when you don't have transportation or you don't have access to a lot of resources, you leave yourself wide open for potential abuse.
Wow. Mistaken, Alaska has a higher population of males than they do females. Am I right?
I don't know that information. I haven't heard that.
Because I remember Alaska was the place where women want to go to find a man. Because a lot of those men, that industry over there, I forget it's different industries. I think fishing is one. Construction. Okay. It's about 4 core industries that Alaska's known for. And if a woman wants to find a husband, they used to tell them to go to Alaska because that's where all the men were working. Yeah, but I don't know if it's like that now, but that was back in the day. But tell me, why is Louisiana second? What's some of the patterns of violence?
Well, Louisiana is second because we're sportsman's paradise, so we have a lot of hunting. So a lot of our residents have guns. So that's why we are number 2 in the nation for domestic homicides. And also we have a lot of rural areas as well. And like I said before, we have lack of resources. One of the local domestic violence shelter that I work with frequently, they cover a large number of parishes, or you guys would call it counties. Right. They cover a large area because there's not a lot of resources.
Right. So because there's lack of resources, there are a lot of people that are not getting treated properly because they don't know about them, or it's because it's just lack of resources.
Correct. So lack of resources, lack of education and awareness. And a lot of times people, they just don't know what a healthy relationship consists of.
My. Now, you alluded to this earlier. I got to ask you, what's domestic homicide? What is that?
So domestic homicide is actually domestic violence ending in murder or death of the partner. And so sometimes we may see that where it's a suicide, homicide thing as well.
Oh, wow. Now, what are the statistics on that? And I know you provide counseling to that with your counseling practice. How high are the
Mhm.
statistics for that?
It's pretty high, like I said, because we're number 2, and I know particularly in Shreveport, we have a very, very high crime rate. I remember last year the statistics were something crazy, like we had maybe 15 murders, and it wasn't even the end of January. So, I
Oh,
mean,
oh.
it's very heavy out here, and there's just a lot going on. So I really try to educate people and inform people regularly, like, these are the signs, this is what you need to do. But ultimately, I think that we just have to be supportive to those who are victims of domestic violence and let them know that whenever they are ready to leave, that we're here for them and that there are some resources available to them when they're ready.
Wow, that is interesting. And elaborate on that further, Jessica. What causes somebody, now, is it homicidal or suicidal when you have a domestic homicide? Which one is it more?
Um, it's sometimes it could be both. It really just kind of depends on the situation. I've seen some where it's been both suicide and homicide at the same time. And then there's been some instances where it's just been homicide. So it just kind of varies, and it's on a case-by-case situation.
Now, normally, is the aggressor in the domestic violence situation, is the aggressor usually the one that commits, I guess, homicide, and the person that's the
Yeah.
victim commits suicide? Is that how it works?
Yes, mostly that is because there's a statistic that goes around that says it takes a victim or a survivor at least 10 times to leave, and
Oh, wow.
every time she tries to leave, it gets dangerous and dangerous. So sometimes they don't make it out because sometimes, a lot of times, it ends in death on their part.
Oh, my goodness, my goodness, my goodness. Um, and I assume when people come see you, and you obviously the guy that's the aggressor, he normally doesn't. I've seen this, and tell me if I'm right. He normally stays away from counseling because he's not the big man anymore in front of his woman, because he's ordered her around, but he's not gonna order you around when you get him up under a facility. Am I right?
Right. Well, normally, by the time it gets to the point of them going to counseling, the
Hmm.
perpetrator may already be in some sort of police custody or something.
Hmm.
They may have already been ordered to go to perpetrators counseling.
Hmm.
And so what I particularly, I have it in my paperwork when people come to me for couples counseling. I do
Hmm.
not do couples therapy for domestic violence couples, simply because you're just going to be put in another abusive situation where that perpetrator is going to try to put on a mask or put on a facade in front of the counselor and
Hmm.
try to gaslight or make the victim appear like something is wrong with them. So I usually do not do couples counseling with couples who are engaged in domestic violence. But usually by the time they come to me, they're usually referred from the local shelter, and there's already been some sort of police involvement already.
Oh my goodness, my goodness, my goodness. Kid, you're a seasoned pro at this, Jessica. Can you read body language when you see someone come to see you? Can you tell who the aggressor is and who the victim is based on body language?
Sometimes you can, but a lot of times if you're dealing with someone who may have a personality disorder, and
Hmm.
it may be difficult, they may be very skilled. That's the thing about a lot of abusive perpetrators.
Hmm.
They can act one way in front of somebody else and a completely different person behind closed doors. So that's why you see that often, even with the celebrities that we love so much,
Hmm.
we love them because they're very charismatic. They're just this
Hmm.
great person in front of everybody else. They're the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and so, but when they're with the victim, they're a totally different person. So sometimes it is difficult to just see based off of body language if somebody is being honest about the way they're treating their partner.
Because I had a personal situation that happened with my family, and I want to ask you this: have you seen situations where the court is trying to get a person to go as counseling, and that person really isn't qualified to be there because they don't have a history of committing questions like that?
Let me see if I get your question right. So you're wondering if they qualify for therapy because they've never had like a prior issue before.
Right, like you have a situation where a guy got into a fight with his girlfriend, okay? And the courts are very, very prejudiced on this. I've seen this. And that may have been, she may have slapped him and he was defending himself or something like that. And they make him take domestic violence classes, but they won't make her take them. Have you seen a situation like that?
Okay. I haven't seen that yet, but I'm pretty sure that does happen. That's probably very common. Like I said, sometimes women are abusers as well. But unfortunately, we can't control what the decision the court makes.
Right.
You know, so if that person is unhealthy for you, whether male or female, if that person is attacking you or putting their hands on you in any way, then I would just recommend that they leave so they won't have to endure any other trials or any other issues if that's the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're coming toward the end of our second segment. Let's hold that thought, Jessica. We'll take our break here.
Okay.
This is Game On Business Talk with Deanne. Hi, we're back. This is Game On Business Talk with D. Anthony Miles, and we have a wonderful topic today, mental wellness for healthy living and life. And we have a wonderful guest today, Jessica Ladden, principal and founder of JL Counseling LLC. And that was a riveting last segment we were talking about, Jessica, on domestic violence, and definitely want to piggyback up on that because that gets into our next segment topic on mental health and some frequent questions that you get. Now, I want to ask you, what kind of questions do you get basically asked you about mental health? What kind of questions do you get, common questions?
Oh, gosh. One is how do I go about getting therapy? How do I convince my significant other to go to therapy? What else? Gosh, there's so many. The main one is how do you deal with family that doesn't necessarily support you through your mental illness or through your mental health issues? So I have a lot of people that their family just doesn't understand mental health, and they think that they're just trying to get attention or something like that. So I get a lot of questions about how do I get my family to work with me and accept me for what I'm going through and support me in everything that I'm going through.
Oh, wow. A lot of times, is it mental health is or what mental illness is, and that's when they come see you until something gets out of hand, or is it that usually the case?
Yeah, usually people come to see me when there is some sort of major issue or crisis occurring. But I do have a few that will come to me. Maybe they've been in counseling before and they just want to continue the process because it's just like, and I tell people this all the time, it's really just like going to get your yearly checkup with your doctor. And I wish we would start looking at it like that. Just like we go to the doctor every year, it should be an ongoing maintenance type of thing with your mental health as well, so that when problems do arise, you're not panicked and you can handle it a little bit better than if you've never talked to anyone about it.
Oh, interesting. What are some of the current issues that you've seen in terms of mental health in that you run into a lot? What kind of things do you see?
Oh, gosh. With this pandemic, this coronavirus pandemic, just since March, I've had a huge influx of clients calling me wanting to have counseling services because they're dealing with depression, they're dealing with severe anxiety, So, and then you see a lot of couples that are going through issues because they've been forced to have to stay at home with each other and work through those issues that they've been avoiding through going to work or going to school or hanging out with other people. So these last, I guess we've been in the pandemic, 6 going on 7 months now, that has really catapulted an increase in mental health issues.
You know, it's close to me, and tell me if you see this a lot. There was a situation where this young lady, her mother was engaged in an alternative lifestyle. Her mother had a partner, and there was the girl was going to school, and she was having problems at school. One, she didn't like her mother's lifestyle, and the other problem was kids were ridiculing her about her mother and her mother's partner. And I felt sorry for this young lady. She just checked out. Do you see things like that a lot?
Yes, so I work predominantly with children. I have a full-time job at a clinic where I work predominantly with children and adolescents, and bullying is a huge issue with kids. And it leads to suicide most of the time.
How bad is it? Is it pretty bad?
It's really bad. Actually, suicide is like the second leading cause of death for ages 10 through 34. So it's very common for this age group of young people, and especially there's been an increase in black children ages 5 to 11 in suicide.
Why is that happening? What's your professional opinion about that? How is that happening?
I think a lot of it is related to social media. Our kids are getting on social media earlier and earlier, as you can see. I know some babies that have social media accounts, and the pressure from having to live up to the facade that you put on social media or living for the likes of other people causes these young people to have so much stress and anxiety about what people think about them, and their self-esteem is so low, and it causes them to feel like they would rather die than to go to school the next day and deal with the ridicule. And nowadays, you know, when we were kids, when we went home, we could kind of get away from the bully. But now, because of social media, the bully is going to be following you, you know, all day long if you stay on the computer or your phone on social media. So there's no getting away from it.
Why is bullying such a problem in, I guess, school? Because when I was in school, they didn't even have a name for bullying. And then the teacher will look the other way or say, you need to handle that yourself. And, you know, some kids are not equipped to fight. They weren't raised like that. What's been your experience with that?
I think there's a lack of tolerance and accepting others for their differences, definitely. And then also there's a lack of problem solving and conflict resolution skills that we had to develop as a kid. There's a lack of conversational skills and communication skills that our children don't have because of so much technology use. So they haven't developed those skills, and it makes them targets for bullying.
What causes a kid to want to be a bully? Is it they're bigger than the other kids? Is it they are stronger than the other kids? What usually causes that, based on your professional opinion?
I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier with the domestic violence and the abuse. It comes back to power and control. And everybody wants to have a sense of power and feeling like they're in control of something. And what I see with a lot of young people who are bullying other children, usually they've been bullied before, and so they feel like, well, my power was taken away, so I'm going to take power over somebody else. Sometimes you'll see a lot of those kids are being abused at home, and so they take their anger out on other children at school. A lot of them may have personal insecurities because they can't read or they're not good in math, and so they take those frustrations, or they try to distract everybody else from, oh, he can't read, to, oh, he's the strongest, he's the baddest in the school. And they would rather have you think about that than think about, oh, they can't read or they can't do math.
Does it, based on your research or based on your counseling people, do you ever counsel bullies? I mean, do you ever see them come into your office and go, you cannot continue to do this? What kind of counseling do you give them? I'm curious.
Well, for a lot of our kids and adolescents and even adults, because there are adult bullies as well.
Absolutely.
I try to pinpoint how they feel about themselves, and if it's a self-esteem issue, we try to go from there. So what is causing you to feel so low about yourself that you feel like you have to tear somebody else down? I really try to look past them as a bully and not put a label on them, and just say, so who are you as an individual, and what type of person do you want to be? How do you want people to perceive you? And usually we can start breaking down some of those barriers and hopefully getting them to be more empathetic towards other people and seeing, like, okay, if this was happening to you, would you like this type of treatment? And most people will say no. But a lot of times it comes down to past abuse. That's a major thing, especially with my adults that have anger management. A lot of it is related to trauma and abuse.
Now, these bullies end up turning into adult bullies, and they get themselves in trouble. Is that right?
Exactly. So I try to tell a lot of my teenagers, at a certain point, you're not going to be viewed as a child anymore. So you have to start making better decisions, and every problem doesn't need your response, or it doesn't need an aggressive reaction. Sometimes you just need to talk things out, but we also try to incorporate the parents into counseling for children, because the parents are the ones that are going to have to reinforce this type of mindset and behavior at home.
Have you seen the bullying lead to violence or anything of that sort based on your experience dealing with bullies, Jessica?
Oh, yes. Well, you see it a lot of times with if you live in an area that has a high gang rate or something like that. But I do see, I used to work at a high school as well, and I would see it often. If you're trying to prove yourself to the other kids that you're not weak, or that you can stand up for yourself, you might try to pick a fight with somebody, and it does get dangerous. And a lot of times, depending on the area that you're in the school that I was at was a very low socioeconomic, high crime neighborhood. Those kids had access to guns, so so it was it could get very scary at times as well. So yes, I've definitely seen and have heard of instances where bullying has ended up deadly or with police involvement.
And who's usually the person? Is it the bully that brings the gun to the school, or is it the victim? Because I've seen it mostly with victims, based on some of the articles I've seen, that the person did want to commit suicide, because I remember you stated earlier that's one of the leading causes of suicide with teens. Bullying has a contribution to that, being bullied at school, and they just check out. But is it any violence that's usually taken against the bully? I'm just curious.
I've seen that before, yes, where people, they get afraid and they try to act out aggressively and violently as well, in hopes that maybe that will keep the bully at bay. But at the end of the day, it really just hurts everybody that's involved. So it's definitely not the answer to, go to school with a weapon, because then that child turns out to be viewed as the aggressor, when really they're just trying to it's a cry for help, essentially. And usually if it gets to that point, it's been going on for a while and nobody has intervened, or the child just hasn't said anything to anybody. And I get that a lot too, where children just won't say, I'm being bullied, because they don't want to be looked at as a snitch or a crybaby or anything like that. So there's a lot of dynamics that go into that.
And there are a lot of bullies that are in mobs too. Is that right? So it's not just one; it's like a group, isn't it?
Right, especially you see that a lot with girls. Girls usually kind of pack together, and it's like, if I don't like you, I'm going to make sure that this whole group of girls doesn't like you. And so usually that's what we'll see a lot in the girls. But it can also happen in the guys too.
Oh, definitely. Are you familiar with I think it's the Phoebe Prince case where the girl committed suicide in high school because it was a group of kids. This was years ago. And she was from Ireland, I believe. She was getting settled in America, and she went to a school, and her parents didn't know any of this was going on. She was being bullied at school, and then she just committed suicide.
It sounds familiar. There's been a lot of cases like that, and it turns out to be that way, where kids may pretend to be your friend or whatever, and then they humiliate you.
Yes.
And then that just kind of pushes them over the edge.
High school is such a small part of your life. It has no predictive information about you. Nobody's a person they were in high school. How do you get these kids to see that? That's
right. It's very, yes, you're right. And I laugh sometimes when I think about some of the things that I was so worried about when I was 15, 16 years old. I just thought it was the end of the world, and I'm able to laugh about it now. It's like, wow, I've grown so much, and I've developed so much as a young lady and as a woman, and now I'm a mom, and I guess I would have never, but because I was 15 or 16, I couldn't think that far. I couldn't think into my 30s or 40s or 50s. Like, that's not developmentally normal for a teenager. So it is very challenging when I'm counseling teens to get them to look ahead and realize this is only temporary. And you'll probably never see these kids again unless you stay here. But a lot of times you guys are going to go off when you graduate from high school. You're going to go off and go to college and move to different parts of the world, and you'll never see each other again. So the opinion of these people, they don't matter in the long run.
Absolutely. Jessica, hold that thought. We're in the end of our third segment. This is Game On Business Talk. We'll be right back. Hi, we're back. This is Game On Business Talk with D'Anthony Miles. We have a wonderful topic today, mental wellness for healthy living and life. And we have a wonderful guest, Jessica Ladden, principal and founder of JL Counseling LLC. That was a riveting last segment, Jessica. We were talking about the teen bullying and teen homicide and suicide. I'd like to piggyback up on that if you don't mind, because that you really dropped some nuggets of wisdom. Why is it so hard for these kids to cope with each other? Is there something that, I know when you're in high school you form cliques and everything. What's been your experience?
Just lack of learning how to regulate their own emotions, and that's something that you learn as young as being a baby or a toddler. When you are having a tantrum because you can't get something that you want, your parents are supposed to guide you into helping you to learn how to deal with that emotion appropriately. But sometimes that is not addressed as a young child, and so as you grow older, you're not able to deal with some of the stresses that come your way, and then it results in chaos the older you get, and it becomes destructive to your relationships and to your overall well-being.
Have you seen this a lot where girls are jealous because one young lady is seeing a high school football star and she come up under attack with bully attacks or whatever? Have you seen that a lot when you deal with counseling with these kids in high school? You see that a lot?
Oh, guys, yes, especially at the high school level. But it happens as young as elementary school, really. But, yes, you'll see that a lot where it's the competitive nature, where the girls are just very jealous or wanting the attention of the guy or several boys. And they'll just kind of alienate one particular girl because she's very pretty or whatever it is that interests the guys. So I do see that often in young ladies.
Wow. Do you usually have to get the ringleader in there for counseling? And if you do, what's been your experience with trying to provide counseling to the ringleader of doing these type of things? What's been your experience?
Well, in the past, I've usually only been able to really work with the victims of bullying because a lot of times the bully or the aggressor, they don't think anything's wrong with them. And you can't necessarily make somebody talk to you, so it has to be a voluntary thing. And a lot of times with abusers or perpetrators, they think that everything is fine.
Are you serious? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So what do they tell you when you talk to them? What kind of responses do you get?
Well, particularly with teenagers, they don't want you to see them in a bad light. So if I ever do come into contact with a child who's been accused of bullying, a lot of times they'll deny it, or they'll place blame on that other person and say, well, they did this to me, or so I was just retaliating. So a lot of time there's no real ownership there or taking responsibility for their actions. And that's typical of a child whose brain is not fully developed yet. So I just try to talk to everybody about the importance of learning how to talk your problems out or stay away from each other, because everybody's not going to be your cup of tea. And you know that even as an adult, there's just going to be people that you work around or you see, and y'all just are not going to get along with each other, and that's okay. But you also don't have to be disrespectful towards one another or put your hands on one another.
Have you seen a situation and you were brought in as a counselor to try to help some students that were just getting out of control? How bad have you seen?
I haven't had too many major incidents, really. I've just the worst I've had are some cyberbullying instances, posting mean things on social media, that type of thing that kind of got around the whole school. But other than that, nothing too outrageous.
Wow. I guess our children represent where we are in society, correct? If we have all these mental illnesses and things that we're dealing in life, well, your kids are a representation of that, so they're mimicking life pretty much. And I like what you said, the perpetrator doesn't see anything wrong, so that lets me know they have a psychotic behavior where they don't feel anything or lack empathy. And do you see that a lot when you deal with people, especially domestic violence situations, with bullying and those type of things? Do you see that a lot, lack of empathy?
Oh, yes, definitely. And that's one of the key things I try to work on with young children. But it's kind of hard to develop that if you've had some sort of trauma. And as you become an adult, it makes it just harder for you to understand how other people are feeling and to not feel entitled and feel like you're right in every situation. So, yes, empathy is something that a lot of people lack. And you can see it all the time, even on television, watching the news. You can see a lot of that lack of empathy and respect for others.
Have you had to have someone refer to you for adult bullying? Have you had to deal with a situation like that? That they needed
No,
to
I haven't. No, normally, at this age, I think that adults tend to just stay away from whoever it is, or sometimes we may wind up seeing them on the 6 o'clock news, with a mugshot. So I think that's kind of what it comes down to. I've never heard of adult bullying, but I'm sure it does happen. It usually tends to come out in another manner, though.
Absolutely, yes, alive and well. It's a little bit more sophisticated than schoolyard bullying, because me and my research team did some research on it. And let me give you an example. Normally, bullying is someone in a superior position to someone that's in a subordinate position. And one of the things, you'll find this interesting, one of the things that adult bullies do is try to sabotage the victim, especially if it's a supervisor or a boss. And one of the things that they
Yes.
do is hide documents to try to humiliate you, sabotage you on a project, and then humiliate you in front of public. And, you know, I wonder if there's a connection between workplace violence and workplace bullying, because people all have their tipping point. What would you say about that?
Oh, yes, I definitely agree. And I've seen a lot of clients that have a lot of workplace stress, and usually it is related to conflict with either a coworker or with a very aggressive supervisor or boss. And so that can create a lot of stress. And like I said, if 1 in 5 adults have a mental illness, and you're adding bullying and aggressiveness and stress on top of that, it's just a recipe for disaster. And so that's why you do see a lot of times you'll have HR, human resources, try to have a lot of trainings on how to deal with people, especially if you're letting someone go, especially particularly with this pandemic. A lot of people were let go, or their jobs were they were laid off from their jobs. And so, but there's a way that you deal with people. There's a way that you handle those situations, and you have to do it with kindness and respect and compassion. And you can't just talk to people any kind of way, because it definitely can backfire on you with the lawsuits, or, you know, unfortunately we have had instances where you've seen it on the news where people have gone to work with weapons, and so that's the last thing we want to have happen.
Man, wow! Have you ever provided a workshop at someone's organization on workplace bullying or bullying? Period. I bet you'd probably get a kick out of that.
I've done talks on bullying. I participated in different things on bullying, but nothing workplace related. I've talked to a few entrepreneurs about just managing their stress so that they can learn to set boundaries or deal with conflict so that it doesn't affect their work. But I haven't done something specifically on workplace bullying, but you've given me an idea for a further presentation in the future. So
it's definitely a problem, and a lot of times, and when we did research on the topic, a lot of times bullying is kind of like the eye of the beholder. It's very hard to prove, and it's hard to prove legally as well. Like, give you something a bully does. What if I go to my department, right, and I don't like you, right? I'll come in the morning, I speak to everybody except you. Now, is that really bullying? No.
Yes, it is.
Some people would say it's not, because I don't have to tell you good morning. I could tell I'm being nice to tell everybody good morning, but I don't have to tell you if I don't like you. Well, somebody might say, like, hey, say if you get a victim, right, and they say, I felt bullied because he spoke to everybody, but he didn't speak to me. Well, maybe that person doesn't like you. They just don't speak to you, but that's not bullying them. So tell me your thoughts on that as an expert. What would you say?
So technically, it would be a form of probably emotional bullying or emotional abuse, because you're trying to make that person essentially feel left out, or you're trying to it's a subtle kind of passive way or passive aggressive way of letting this person know I don't like you. And so I know that a lot of times with abuse, it is very subjective, like you said, in the eye of the beholder. And a lot of people are just not educated on what different abuse or bullying is. And so I think if we educate people more, they'll be more aware, and that will save them from having a lot of issues in the work environment or getting write-ups or being disciplined, because they are leading with their emotions instead of leading with their reasoning.
Wow, that is interesting. Good. We're going to have to bring you back, Jessica. You dropping that heat today. But piggyback on what you said, that's a form of bullying called ostracism, where the bully tries to isolate the victim from the group. And another form of that, which is definitely passive aggressive, another form of that is called icing out. And what that means is, like, I've had this happen to me, and like, say the bully doesn't like you, and the bully says, well, I don't want you to attend any employee meetings. I don't want you there. You don't need to be there. So that's a form of ostracism, to isolate you from everybody else, to continue to torment you. That's what bullies do. And bullies also, really love this, Jessica. They make a policy on the fly. They make a policy just for you.
Yes.
Have you seen that?
Yes, or send emails, and CC everybody, to try to humiliate you. And we, I've been in companies where we talked about workplace humiliation.
Wow.
But it's a very thin line that people have to be very careful about that, unless they want to get a lawsuit.
I mean, again, bullying is still hard to prove legally. I think it's gotten better.
Yeah.
But if somebody comes in and says good morning to everybody but doesn't say it to you, that could be, somebody could say, well, what does that have to do with your job performance? He doesn't have to talk to you. But the bully knows what they're doing. They know what they're doing. They're very clever.
And it can make you so uncomfortable to where it is affecting your job performance.
Oh, that happens all the time. There's statistics that people, when they experience trauma or anything that related to bullying at work, absenteeism is higher, sick leave, turnover. A lot of times, you got to ask yourself, is that bully worth me getting a lawsuit? And a lot of people look the other way, but you really can't. You really can't.
Yeah, you can't. You can't.
Oh, wonderful. We're toward the end of our last segment. Jessica, I wanted to ask you, if our listeners want to get in contact with you about your mental health and therapy services, what's the best way they can reach you?
They can reach me at jlcounselingllc.com. I have more information in there about the services I provide, and they can send me a message directly for inquiries, whether it's about booking or about counseling services.
Okay, I don't think you would have given me a number. You're going to go on and hit them with the email, right?
Yeah. They can also call me. If you're not a technologically savvy person, you can call me at 318-759-7865.
Okay. You want to give your email just in case?
Yeah, sure. wellness@jlcounselingllc.com.
Oh, wow. Well, goodness, we're going to have to bring you back, young lady. You was dropping that heat today. We could talk about bullying for about a whole show.
Yes. Just let me know when you want me to come back.
Awesome. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for joining us on the show. We really enjoyed you. And please let me know. Get in contact with the studio. Definitely love to bring you back if you're interested. I think I got my money's worth today. That's for sure.
Well, thank you again for having me. I'm always excited and ready to talk about mental health.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, dear. Well, we're out of here. This is our show for today. Thank you for joining us. We want to again thank our guest, Jessica Lattin, Principal and Founder of JL Counseling LLC. And we had a wonderful show today on mental wellness for healthy living and life. This is Game On Business Talk with D. Anthony Miles. We will see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Game On Business Talk Radio with host D. Anthony Miles.